now. Certainly one of the most recognizable faces in poker for the last 2 decades. Real Kid Poker, Danny Negreanu, was injured on Saturday night, and he joins us right now. Daniel, I appreciate you being here. I guess my first question is, how you doing? I know your hand was injured.
Well, there you go. There you have it. Right. So yeah, no, the hand is last night I got my wife, she's really good with this stuff, redressing it and stuff, but taking the bandage off was like 10 times more painful because like I think, the gauze strip stuck to it. But oddly, and I mean, I guess this is not surprising for anyone who's been in one of these situations, is I didn't feel anything while it was happening. Not till, we calmed down and settled did I go, what is that? And then noticed that there's like, I could see stuff in my hand that I'm probably not supposed to be able to see.
I would imagine, you've been playing poker for a very long time, but I would imagine you've never had to deal with anything like this before. I mean, this must have been pretty scary. What was going through your mind, Daniel, when all this was happening? Like, were you just like everybody else? Like, what the hell is going on here? What was going through your mind at that point?
We were having fun. It was like one of the more, the World Series of Poker's winding down. Everyone's in a good mood. We're having some beers or whatever. And then I just we hear a little bit of a commotion. And I look to my right and I see just a mob of people all running, like not in the same direction, just kind of chaotically. And of course, with what we see in the news every single day, specifically here more so than anywhere else, the first thought is shooter, right? Or what? So that is in everyone's mind, that's the first thought. So instinct takes over, and then the first thing you do is you start to run and try to get out of the building.
So, I mean, is there really anything that the World Series of Poker could have done? I mean, what do you do when you have that many people in a room and they're all, scared and they're running? I mean, I'm not sure there was anything that they could have done, right?
No, of course not. I mean, you run a big venue, you have a whole bunch of people. I think we're lucky that the place wasn't full because it was near the end of the World Series. If it was full, we might have had, even more of an issue. But from their perspective, I mean, how do you prepare for somebody, sort of creating hysteria and then everyone hearing, whether it was, I'm not even sure what happened at the base of it, hearing gun, hearing shooter, and people start running. I think the World Series of Poker, frankly, did a really, really good job of having an EMT on staff immediately, so that for anybody like myself, they can get bandaged up and whatever else. But outside of that, I mean, you tell me. I can't imagine there's any sort of magic pill idea to calm the situation outside of they went on social media quickly and said, guys, there's no shooter, as soon as they heard that, because that's really, I think, in part where it started too, because it wasn't just at Paris and Bally's. People at the Bellagio, there's 5-6 different casinos, everyone was hiding under tables and stuff, because when you hear shooter, and what we experienced here 5-6 years ago, people take it seriously. It's not, there's one guy in a picture, it's funny because he's from Argentina. Everyone's running and under the table and he's like eating ice cream. It's like, well, what's up? No issue. But everyone here, we live in a little bit of a state of fear of these sort of events. And it's not irrational. It's not an overreaction. And I'll tell you what, last night wasn't real. Or sorry, the other night wasn't real. But it makes no difference. Because to everyone in that building while it was happening, it was real. There was a shooter. And I remember when I fell down for like the third or fourth time, I was like, he's got me now. Because, I'm falling behind the pack right here.
Yeah, Danny, we can cut right to the chase, right? You just brought up, right, someone from another country that is not, necessarily aware of the American gun culture, right? Of what's transpired here in this country over the past, 5, 6, 7, 10 years, right? And there is an element of this where we are on edge as a society right here in the United States. There is an element here where we haven't, this in our back of our head that this could be happening. This could be some type of mass shooting situations right here in Las Vegas, obviously, with Route 91, which happened, just a matter of a few years ago. So it's really is about that mindset, right, that we have in America that can cause a scenario in a situation like this that transpired on Saturday night.
Yeah, and obviously, when you look at who's to blame for that, you look a lot of different directions. I think, a big responsibility is the media, right? Sensationalizing, creating this sort of fear, because as we know, fear does sell. People tune in for fear, for things they're afraid of. So, these shootings are happening. I don't know the answer. I mean, you have to cover it, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it's all these school shootings, you have to cover it. But at the same time, I guess the question remains how are we recovering it? And I think, part of why the reaction we saw happened was because of a fear that's instilled in people. And again, it's not irrational. to have this fear when you see it on the news every single day.
Sure. But Daniel, you being Canadian, you guys don't have a slither of the gun violence we have in this country. Now, listen, I think there's a lot of different reasons, right? I don't think assault weapons should be sold to the general public. That's just my personal opinion. Yes, we have to do a better job dealing with mental illness, but I don't think an 18-year-old, the day he turns 18, should be able to walk into a gun store and buy a bunch of AR-15s and 6,000 rounds of ammunition. And then you have a lot of people, and I'm just going to call it out, people on the right, people like Ted Cruz, who say, well, we need to lock doors. We need to arm all our kindergarten teachers. I just think we have a lot of morons in office these days. I don't think that helps. And I think the NRA is also an issue because they're in the back pocket of a lot of these politicians. Would you agree with that?
So I have an idea that I would imagine every rational person would look at and go, huh, that makes sense. So I remember when I wanted to drive a car, okay, I had to study a book. I had to do a written test, and then I had to pass that test. Once I passed that test, I needed to get in a car with another professional. They needed to see how I handled the car. Then I got a license. Now, to register my car, I needed to go to registration. My car registers to my name, right? So, and why do we do all that? Because driving a car can be dangerous. You can kill somebody with that thing, right? So why can't we have a similar process where you're like, oh, would you like a gun? Great. We're going to do a written test. You're going to get a psychological profile. You're going to go to a shooting gallery with somebody, and you're going to shoot the gun and make sure that you're not hitting random people and that you're using it safely and responsibly. That doesn't, I don't want to take your guns, people. I don't. Right. Second Amendment's there. Second Amendment was written hundreds of years ago before the AR-15 existed by a bunch of guys who sat around a room while their slaves brought them tea and coffee. And this is one of the things that I find interesting about America. The obsession with the idea that this document is infallible. It was written hundreds of years ago, and it needs amendments. The Second Amendment itself is called an amendment because it should be amended. It's a living, breathing document, and it needs to be updated so that it's, as you said, it's not so easy for a 17-year-old kid to get a gun in his hands.
Daniel, it's incredible because I know my producer and my co-host will agree with you have echoed everything that I have said on this show all the time. You are so right. We agree. You buy a car, or I'm sorry, you try to get your driver's license, you got to take the test, you got to re-register your car. You have to learn how to drive a car. Yet AR-15s that were designed for only one reason, to kill as many people as possible in a short period of time. Oh, we don't need to train you how to use that gun. You know, and then we hear the good guy, bad guy scenario. Really? Well, that didn't work out. How did that work out in Uvalde? How did that work out with that mass shooter in that supermarket in Buffalo? Sometimes the good guy wins, but not all the time. So how do you feel about these assault weapons? And do you agree with me that no sane person, nobody needs an AR-15 or assault weapon to defend themselves?
Well, I mean, listen, if we just look at the sheer numbers, it's not a mental health issue because mental health is a crisis all over the world. It's not video games because video games are available all over the world. But what is unique about America that is different than all these other first world countries? I'm not comparing us to Nicaragua and, in different places like that where, these kind of things, do happen. Like other first world countries, the fact is you can get a gun, most every country, but there is a process. It is not that easy. In America, you can be old enough to shoot a gun, but not old enough or responsible enough to have a beer, right? When you think about that, I'd like to reverse that. There's nobody that's 17 years old that needs to own a gun. You don't, your brain is not ready yet. Think about it. Think about being in high school. Think about being in high school with social media now, right? And kids making fun of you or poking fun of you. And now knowing that you can, in a short period of time, have a rageful fitting anger, get yourself a gun, get as many rounds as you like, and shoot up a school or anything like that. Like, come on, man, enough with this. Like the idea that we need only one door. Yeah, because that makes sense.
Ridiculous.
Right. And to Daniel, to Brian's point too, right? It's not like these mass shootings are taking place with muskets or handguns, right? We're talking about the mass majority of these mass shootings that take place around the country. What weapon is being used? The AR-15, right?
Yeah.
Brian just talked about assault weapons.
Sure.
So there has to be some kind of element of common sense that takes place here, right?
And we already do.
Makes sense.
We already do have regulation of what weapons you can own. You can't own a nuclear weapon.
Right.
You can't. We don't allow that. Despite, if you look at the Second Amendment, maybe, the Second Amendment covers my right to own a nuclear weapon, right? But well-regulated is in there. Well-regulated militially. We have to look at it. And again, ultimately, as you guys are touching on, what they were ruling on was a self-defense weapon, essentially, that wasn't designed to just spray bullets, right? That didn't exist when the Constitution did. The internet didn't exist.
So I have to ask you this then, Daniel. By the way, for just joining us, Real Kid Poker, Daniel Negreanu, World Series of Poker champion. So Daniel, you being a poker player for this amount of time, I have to ask you this. We always hear open carry, open carry, open carry. I got to tell you, you know this better than anybody. Poker is a very emotional game. I'm not saying every poker player is crazy, but there's always going to be a small percentage of poker players that are. Would you feel comfortable if you were in an open carry state, city, whatever the case may be, where you could see 5 or 6 guns, people sitting at your table carrying guns? Because I wouldn't be comfortable with that, especially if there's alcohol involved. How would you feel about that as a professional poker player, having people with guns sitting next to you at the poker
Yeah,
table?
I think having guns might be an advantage because I certainly wouldn't show them a bluff, to try to rile them up and piss them off. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
no, I mean, I think personally, like seeing guns around it creates fear. Like when Neymar comes, Neymar comes and plays the World Series of Poker, and he obviously has his bodyguards, and they come fully, geared up with all the weapons, and I'm uncomfortable just around that. Just seeing that's there. I don't like the idea at all of a bunch of people just open carrying guns, and I find it interesting. Not so interesting, but if you go to a rally, Trump rally, NRA, guess what? You're not allowed to have.
Right, no guns.
Guess what you're not allowed to have. You can't bring a gun in there because it's unsafe to them.
Right.
But they want you to be able to have a gun in kindergarten class. Like, come on, bro.
It just makes absolutely no sense. And I listen, there's a lot of things we can do in this country. I'm sure you and I would agree to lower the violence. Obviously, there's nothing we can do to change it all. But when people always make the case, I say to them, there's one main reason why we have so much gun violence in this country. It's because we have more guns than any other country in the world, right? Daniel, this isn't brain surgery, right? That's the main reason.
I think that's a big part of it, but it's a subset of like the issue of like how, because there's plenty of guns in Canada. We have tons of guns there, plenty of guns. The difference is people that are getting these guns, their background checks are happening, and the type of weaponry that they can get. I don't know that, in Canada, you can just go buy AR-15s, and it's, there's a much more like belabored process. There is a problem in the U.S. too, and you have to acknowledge this of illegal guns but the truth, but from what I'm seeing is all the domestic terrorists, which the profile is young white kids, by the way, if we're being honest, right?
Yeah.
That is the profile of a young domestic terrorist because they're all young white kids. Like the issue is they're not getting them illegally. They're going to gun shows. They're getting, they're using the loopholes and stuff like that. And that's how they're getting all this, deadly stuff.
I have to ask you this. You mentioned young white kids. Why is it that so many of these young white kids, some of them are unscathed, they're arrested, they're taken into custody? One white kid, I'm not even going to say his name, who goes into a church years back, kills a bunch of innocent black people, and then 30 minutes later, they handcuff him and they ask him if he's hungry, and they buy him Burger King. Yet we have some black people in this country that are unarmed, they're being shot 60 times. How is that possible?
Oh, I don't know that. I wish I had the answers to that. But yeah, no, I see what you're saying. It's sort of a discrepancy in terms of like, offense or severity. And listen, I'm not going to say it's 100% a racial issue, but you have to think that if this guy was brown and had a long beard and was screaming Allah Akbar, that he wouldn't have been like, handled quite the same way. And listen, I don't know. I don't make the rules in that. But I do find it odd when people say things like, well, we find it wasn't a terror attack. What do you think terror is? What do you mean by terror? Terror is terrorizing a group of people. So when you're saying there wasn't a terrorist attack, you're connecting it to religious ideology and you're connecting it to brown people, essentially. It wasn't that. Don't worry. It wasn't ISIS guys. It was just another crazy white kid who went to a movie theater and shot the place up. It's not terror, not a terror attack. Just your average Tuesday.
So Daniel, to circle back, of course, to your injury on Saturday night, you, myself, Brian, we talk a lot of hockey, right? All the major sports, they have an injury report. And Brian and I were kind of bouncing this before the segment started. Is there a possibility there could be a injury report coming to poker sometime soon, given what transpired with you Saturday night?
Well, it is funny that you say that because I do run a fantasy league, the 25K fantasy, where you basically, you bid on players. And we had during the summer, because, COVID is still here and there, we had like what we call the COVID IR, the COVID absence problem, because we'd have a player, oh, no, he's down with COVID. He's out for 6 to 7 days, so we sort of had that. But as far as like these kind of injuries, no, I don't know that we're going to have a injured reserve for hand injuries, because I still played yesterday, even with this.
So I know, Daniel, you're probably pretty pokered out at this point. I'm not going to use the term burnout, but you've been playing poker for the most part every day, right? For the last 90 days or so. So let me get this question out of the way, and then we'll talk about a more fun topic for you, which I'm sure is VGK hockey.
Yeah.
Listen, you've been one of the top players in the world for decades. Obviously, this was not one of your better World Series of poker. I think you'd be the first one to admit that. Let's talk a little bit about that. What are your thoughts on this year, and why do you think you didn't have the results that clearly you wanted?
Yeah, so I had 12 caches or something like that, which, to most people would sound like a decent,
To most, yeah.
but no, but overall, so here's the thing. When you play poker, depending on the level you play, like if you played $10 tournaments, right? And you were down like $70, for example, or $100, that'd be a bad run, but manageable for you. Well, I play a lot of really high buy-in tournaments, so I ended up down about $1 million. But one of those tournaments was 500,000 that was spent. Another one was 200,000. So in the bigger picture, it wasn't, as ugly as that. But as far as the reasoning, the thing about poker, it's a short sample size, 50 to 60 events over a summer. The number one predictive factor of how well or bad you're going to do is how well you do in those, spots where you need to be lucky, where you're flipping coins, if you will,
Right.
where you have a pair of tens, your opponent has ace king, or even when you have ace eight, pocket kings and the player has ace king holding there. And this year I had a particularly unlucky run. And that'll happen. I kept my head up and I was resilient and I showed up every day and, tried to make the best of it. Of course, throughout a 7-week series, you're going to make mistakes. But each year I play, I make fewer. So a lot of people make the mistake of looking at results in poker and thinking he must have played well or he must have played poorly. And because that would be true in most every sport, it isn't in poker. You can
I
play
agree.
still lose.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree with you 150% on that one. You can win or lose, and it doesn't necessarily mean you played well or you played bad. All right, I got to ask you one more. I lied. One more poker question. I know this happened a month ago, but I want to give you an opportunity to respond on this show. You did absolutely nothing wrong. You're kicked out of an event. I shouldn't say kicked out. What am I saying? You lost. You lost all your chips. You got unlucky in a hand, and I think it was like one of your GoPro cameras where you slam it against a wall. You didn't hurt anybody. You're just frustrated. There's nothing wrong with having some passion. You were upset. You were angry. And then a professional poker player, Justin Bonomo, I believe that's his name, he's just a weird guy. We don't even need to go. He's just a weird dude. And he's criticizing you. And he's basically making statements, and I'm paraphrasing here, that you're a threat to women or this behavior is a threat to women. Daniel, I got to say, some of the people in the poker community are just morons. There's nothing wrong with showing emotion at the poker table. You didn't swear at someone. You didn't do anything like a Phil Hellmuth would do at the poker. You didn't insult anybody. You were a little angry. Why was this a story? And why were you being criticized? I just don't get it. I watched the video. You did nothing wrong. You were just frustrated.
Yeah. So here it is, right? This is, as you can see on your screen, this is the deadly weapon. Dun, 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 that makes women afraid. I'll tell you what, I was actually really, really happy to see the response on poker. It made me feel some hope for the next generation where people were lashing out. Like Liv Baree, who is a woman, said, I'm sick of this, Justin. Stop treating us like we're your little flowers that you need to protect. And, you virtue signal. So here's the issue. Like politically, I don't feel like in the last 10, 20 years, I don't feel like my views have changed at all. But where I stand politically has, because both extremes have gone further wacko, okay? There's wackos on the right, and you also have wackos on the left, and that's where Justin lives. Justin lives in the microaggression, woe is me, safe room craziness, right? So somehow he connected me losing a hand, throwing my selfie stick on the ground. He took that to violence against women, domestic abuse, and how this is making it more difficult to get women in poker. And I find it so condescending to hold these women as these weak little flowers, as Liv Baree pointed out, that need Justin Bonomo's protection. So overall, I was happy with how it turned out, because outside of a minority of people, very small handful of people, the vast majority of people said, with common sense, go, what is your problem? He was pissed off. We all get pissed off sometimes. Sometimes we throw a water ball on the ground, whatever. You ever watch sports, bro? You never see someone lose and break their stick against the glass or throw their helmet on the ground. It just shows passion. I mean, again, as you said, I didn't direct it at anybody. I didn't yell at anyone. I just, had internal frustration and I showed it. So I was, again, happy to see that common sense prevailed here for the most part, because that's where I believe personally my political beliefs are. I like to think in common sense. I don't look at an issue that comes to the table and go, what do the left think? What does the right think? No. What do I think? What do I think? Then I'll listen to both sides. But I want to have my own thoughts independent of those. And you know what? not often, but sometimes I do look at the right and go, no, I agree with them on this issue.
Sure.
And that should be the way it is. But, we don't live in that world anymore.
Yeah, I agree. Again, I agree with you 150%. I try to look at the same issues as you do. I look at an issue and I don't think of it from a left or right perspective. I just think of it as my own opinion, and I hear both sides of the argument. Again, if you're just joining us, he is Real Kid Poker, Daniel Negreanu, also VGK super fan. And it's been a little while since we had Daniel on. Obviously, I don't want to bother him during the World Series of Poker, but Daniel, some things have happened with VGK hockey in the last several months. We have a new coach, new goalie coach, by the way, Daniel. I'm sure you know who he is. Sean Burke, a former Hartford Whaler goaltender, by the way. Sean's a friend of mine. He's our new goalies coach here. And like I said, new head coach, not necessarily new regime, though. McCrimmon's still there, of course. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the Max Pacioretty situation. I guess let's start there. He's gone now. What did you think of that situation? Didn't seem like Vegas got much in return.
Yeah. I think we're going to have to change that VGK Superfan title because I don't feel like one. I won't wear the gear as long as Kelly McCrimmon's still the GM. Like, that's a promise. You won't, if I'm going to games, I'll be wearing either the opposing jersey or I'll be wearing just black or something like that.
Are you really going to do that?
Well, I don't know, but I'm not going to wear Golden Knights. I won't wear the gear unless if he's such a jerk. I can't support him. I root for the guys and I want them to do well. But the Pacioretty thing on its surface. So here's the way you can look at it. You can look at it two ways, right? On its face, moving Pacioretty at $7 million, I think makes sense on the last year of his contract because he's an injury-prone guy. I don't know if he can live up to $7 million. So on its surface. Now the question is this, though, right? Let's look at it from a bigger picture situation. You get absolutely nothing in return, right? Nothing. Actually, not only nothing, you have to give up a prospect in Dylan Coughlin for them to take Pacioretty, right?
You mean future considerations isn't a huge thing, Daniel? Come
No.
on.
So when you look at the pattern that's developed, Fleury, absolutely nothing in return. Dead enough. We paid assets. We lost Suzuki. We lost picks. We lost Tatar. We had to give away a second-round pick to get rid of the Dadonov and Fleury. So what you're seeing is you're seeing some guy with a credit card who keeps buying shit that he can't afford, right? And then he's hawking stuff he just bought. So he just bought a camera for $1,000 and he's trying to get $150 for it, right? Eventually, you got to pay that bill. So this is all part of a bigger problem in terms of how their asset management department has done a terrible job because every team that they deal with, they know, bro, you have no leverage. You're already $5 million over the cap. You added a $10 million player. We ain't giving you nada, bro. So for them to just be cap compliant, they needed to make a deal, right? And so moving Pacioretty of all the deals that they probably could have made, let's say, for example, I jumped in as GM, right before this Pacioretty deal, that was probably something I would have done just to fit under the cap. Because I'm like, well, who else are we going to get rid of? You know what I'm saying? And so is this team, they talk about win now and all that, but if you look at the moves they're making, how does that coincide with win now? It doesn't. Yeah. It's just now, if you look at the Jack Eichel deal, you have to add, what did that deal cost? It wasn't just Tuck and Krebs and picks. It was also Pacioretty. Because in order to fit Eichel in, you had to move Pacioretty for nothing. So they're getting fleeced. Well, Kelly's getting fleeced in every single deal. He's an embarrassment. How he goes home and thinks, whoa, we're doing a great job. No, you're a nincompoop. I promise you, I could take 10 poker players who know nothing about hockey at all, give them a 30-day training, and they would do a better job of asset management than this absolute buffoon.
Here's another way, Daniel, too, to look at the Max Pacioretty situation. Maybe this is kind of a rear view mirror type of way to look at it. They made the move, obviously, 5 years ago to get Max Pacioretty. They traded away Nick Suzuki, right? A guy who can be a good young player in this league. Looks like he's got a lot of potential, right? They traded away Thomas Tatar, and they also traded away a second-round draft pick there. Essentially, they lost those guys. They got Max Pacioretty for 5 years where they have no Stanley Cups to show for it. They had a couple of decent runs in the playoffs, but for all intents and purposes, it wasn't a great run for Max Pacioretty here in Vegas. And what did they get for shipping out Nick Suzuki and Tatar and that second-round pick? Future considerations, what I just said, right? So you can kind of look at it that way as far as if you want to look at it from an incompetent standpoint for the Vegas Golden Knights upper brass when it comes to
but I would push back just a tad on Pacioretty because coming from Montreal, I thought he was going to be much worse than he was because he was on the downtrend of his career, but he actually did quite well here. I mean, if you look at his numbers while he played here in Vegas, they got the best Pacioretty they were going to get aside from the injury issues. But as you point out, how much did you pay for that, right? You didn't get a cup out of it. You can't blame that on one player, but ultimately you cost yourself a foundation, because this team has none. This team has overpriced, high priced free agents who are, or sorry, like, big ticket guys with no supporting stack. Like, if you look at what is this bottom six going to look like now? You might lose Colasar. You already lost Janmark. You probably can't. You might not be able to sign Nick Waugh. We got Riley Smith back. Now you have to hope that Stone and Pietrangelo don't get hurt, and Lehner can return, healthy, maybe November, December-ish. So I think there's still a lot of like big holes in this team, and I think they got weaker as a result of a lot of the deals they made, but ultimately like the Eichel deal too. Like, that was costly, and it ripped a lot of the team out. And I don't blame Eichel at all. I think he's going to be the best player in this team by a wide margin. But we just weren't in a position to add a guy like Eichel when we did.
You mentioned chemistry issues, Daniel. I mean, Pietrangelo, I think they have chemistry issues. I'm mentioning it. I think there are chemistry issues in the locker room. Pietrangelo, I've spoken to former players and current players, guys that have played with him. Not the most likable guy. Great player, not the most likable guy in the locker room. But I have to ask you about Robin Lehner. We know all the drama that took place when DeBoer was here. I know you're close with Robin. I think he's a good guy. I don't know him anywhere near as well as you do. He seems to be a guy that cares about people. He cares about his profession. He works hard every day. Do you think he is the starting goaltender, game one, season opener for the Vegas Golden Knights?
Well, I would have to say, based on the severity of the injury that Pete DeBoer pretended didn't exist, right? What injury? Oh, no, he's fine. But based on the severity of the injury and the surgery, first of all, I don't think he'll be in training camp on time, and I would doubt that he'll be ready, on for the first game in October, which leaves you with, as of now, you have Logan Thompson and Laurent Boisson. But I would imagine in the next couple of weeks or so, you're going to see what the Boisson contract move on, which I don't know, what means. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's more that's going to change here with Robin, still getting moved. Like, the thing about this team, we got a new coach, which I'm obviously happy about. We'll see how that pans out. But like, nothing's off the table. No one's safe, right? Anybody could be moved at any. They might trade Eichel, by November. Like, we don't know what's going to happen here. So, but as far as like Robin starting game one, if I had to bet on it, I would say no, not right now.
Does he want to stay here?
Listen, this guy, I don't know. Like, I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, yes. Like, he's got the starting role here. He wants it to make it work. He's a team guy and all that kind of stuff. But I can't imagine, it was easy for him in the last year and a half or so when he took over as a starter. Like, it wasn't his fault Fleury was moved, right? Yeah. He did carry the team. When he was better than Fleury when they were playing together in the bubble. He had great numbers. This last year he was injured. He had two major injuries, right? So that of course affected his performance. And then of course you deal with the fans like turning on him, despite the injuries. And Fleury, we want Fleury back. I'm like, I get it. But none of this was his fault. So it was a trying year probably for him from an injury perspective. And then also just feeling like, sort of the lack of support and actually forget the lack of support, like seeing people wearing t-shirts, well,
that was ridiculous. We've talked about that on this show before, Daniel. Some of these fans are complete imbeciles, but I think a big part of it is McCrimmon. I think if McCrimmon is not here, I think it's like an insta call in poker. Robin's all in. I'm not saying he's not all in as far as giving it 100%. I'm just saying, and I think you would agree with me, McCrimmon is a big problem and a big part of this. But hey, Daniel, listen, man, I appreciate you always coming on the show. It's been a little while. I hope your hand recovers, my friend.
Heal up quick.
Yeah, it's looking nasty, man. Like if you had to play poker, like what would you do right now? Are you still
in poker? I came 13th in the last event yesterday.
Oh, jeez, I didn't know that.
So my wife taped this up pretty good, but the thing is, she's not her fault. We got the wrong pads. We didn't get the no stick gauze pads. So the most painful experience I had was last night when she redressed it. Ooh. Ripping the thing off was like, I was screaming. My dogs had to go run and hide in the corner in the laundry room. It was bad.
God. You should have put a video out and showed everybody on. No,
it looks like he has a cast. He's showing. I'm looking at the video right now. He looks like a cast.
Well, I'm glad you didn't get any other injuries worse than that, and I'm glad nobody else did either. I know some people were bruised up and they were hurt, but there was nothing, anything worse than that. Hey, Daniel, always appreciate when you come on. See, we can talk about guns and we can talk about goalies in the same segment. That's what I love about impressive. Daniel. Yeah. Hey, Daniel, heal up, my friend. Always a pleasure when you come on, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Take care.
Thanks, Daniel. Have a good one. That's Real Kid Poker, Danny Negreanu. We got he got the wrong hand dealt to him at the World Series of Poker, I guess you could
I
say.
see what you did there.
You
Mr.
see what I did
Shapiro.
there.
I
But
do.
I love that guy.
Yeah.
I also like him because he thinks a lot like me.
And I like him because he's opinionated and he's not